The courthouse door slammed shut behind Marcus as a judge's words still echoed in his mind. Guilty of first-degree murder. Life sentence without parole. His hands trembled as a cold metal handcuff bit into his wrists, the flash of cameras blinding him as reporters shouted questions he couldn't answer. 3 months ago, he was planning a future with Keisha and her 2 children. Now he was walking toward a prison van, convicted of killing a man he'd never even met. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could, and the worst part? He still didn't know why the woman he loved had destroyed his life. If you think you know how this story ends, think again, because what happens next will shock you to your core. Make sure you're subscribed because this tale of love, betrayal, and revenge will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty. Marcus had met Keisha 6 months earlier at a community center in Lagos where she worked as a receptionist. She was struggling to make ends meet, raising her 2 young children, 5-year-old Amora and 3-year-old Kimi, while living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment in the Surulere district. Her baby daddy, Tunde, had abandoned them years ago, leaving her with nothing but broken promises and unpaid bills. Marcus, a construction worker with steady income and a kind heart, saw her pain and wanted to help. He started by fixing small things around her apartment, then helping with groceries, and eventually he found himself falling in love with not just Keisha, but with the idea of being a father to her children. The single mother of 2 seemed grateful, always telling him how different he was from other men, how he was their savior. Their relationship moved fast, perhaps too fast. Within 2 months, Marcus was spending most nights at Keisha's place, helping with the children's homework and taking them to school. He used his savings to pay for Amora's school fees and bought new clothes for both kids. Keisha would cry in his arms, telling him about the emotional blackmailing from her family who blamed her for Tunde leaving, about the neighbors who whispered behind her back, calling her a failed woman. Marcus felt protective of this single mother of 2 who seemed so vulnerable, so in need of someone to shield her from the world's cruelty. He promised her that he would never abandon them like Tunde had, that he would be the man they deserved. Little did he know, Keisha was already planning his destruction. The night everything changed started like any other. Marcus came home from work to find Keisha unusually quiet, her eyes red from crying. She claimed Tunde had been threatening her, demanding money she didn't have, and that he'd gotten involved with dangerous people. She begged Marcus to stay away from certain areas of the city, claiming Tunde's new associates were violent drug dealers who wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone who got in their way. Marcus, being the protective man he was, assured her that he would keep them safe. That same night, unknown to Marcus, Keisha made a phone call that would seal his fate. She dialed a number she hadn't used in months, her voice shaking as she whispered, "Tunde, it's me. I need to see you. It's about Marcus." The single mother of 2 was about to make a choice that would destroy an innocent man's life. The next morning, Marcus woke up to police sirens and heavy knocking on the door. Within minutes, his world crumbled as officers stormed in with a warrant for his arrest. They'd found his fingerprints on a weapon used in a murder that happened across town, a murder he knew nothing about. As they dragged him away, he looked back at Keisha, expecting to see shock and disbelief on her face. Instead, he saw something that made his blood run cold, guilt mixed with what looked almost like relief. The single mother of 2 he had loved and protected had just handed him over to a fate worse than death, and he was about to discover that the woman who cried in his arms was capable of betrayal so deep it would haunt him for years to come. But wait until you hear what Keisha did next, because this is just the beginning of a story that will make you question every act of kindness you've ever shown. Don't you dare stop watching now, because next chapter reveals a twisted plan that started it all. 3 weeks before Marcus's arrest, Keisha sat in a dimly lit bar in Ikeja, her hands wrapped around a cold bottle of beer as she waited for the man who had destroyed her life years ago. Tunde walked in like he owned the place, his gold chains catching the light, his expensive clothes a stark contrast to the poverty he'd left her in. He'd heard through mutual friends that she was seeing someone new, someone who was taking care of his children, and his ego couldn't handle it. "So you think you can replace me?" he said, sliding into the booth across from her. The single mother of 2 tried to keep her voice steady as she explained that Marcus was just helping out, that he meant nothing to her. But Tunde's jealousy ran deeper than the ocean, and he had no intention of letting another man raise his children or touch his woman, even if he'd never wanted either responsibility. Tunde leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that made Keisha's skin crawl. He told her about the murder he committed 2 days earlier, a drug deal gone wrong that ended with a man dead in an alley. He'd been sloppy, left evidence, and the police were getting close. But he had a plan, and it involved the man Keisha was sleeping with. "You're going to help me pin this on your boyfriend, or I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are," he said, pulling out his phone to show her photos he'd taken of her years ago during their relationship, intimate photos that would destroy her reputation and her job. The emotional blackmailing was nothing new. Tunde had always been a master manipulator, but this time he was asking her to destroy an innocent man's life. The single mother of two felt her world spinning as she realized the depth of her ex's evil, but she also knew she had no choice. The plan Tunde outlined was sickeningly simple and effective. He would plant Marcus's fingerprints on the murder weapon, using a glass Marcus had touched at Keisha's house. Keisha's job was to provide an alibi for Tunde while making sure Marcus had no solid alibi for the night of the murder. She would also need to plant seeds of doubt about Marcus's character with the police, suggesting he'd been acting strangely, that he'd shown violent tendencies. "But has never hurt anyone," Keisha whispered, tears streaming down her face. Tunde's laugh was cold and heartless. "That's not my problem. You choose, him or me. But remember, I'm the father of your children, and blood is thicker than whatever you think you have with this stranger." The single mother of two realized she was trapped between two impossible choices: betray the man who loved her children, or face the consequences of Tunde's threats and lose everything she'd worked to build. As the days leading up to Marcus's arrest passed, Keisha found herself living a double life that was eating her alive from the inside. During the day, she played the loving girlfriend, cooking Marcus's favorite meals and listening to him talk about their future together. At night, she would sneak phone calls to Tunde, coordinating the details of their betrayal. She watched Marcus help Amora with her math homework and felt her heart break, knowing she was about to destroy the only stable father figure her children had ever known. When Marcus bought Kimi a new doll and spent an hour playing with her, Keisha had to excuse herself to the bathroom to cry. The emotional blackmailing from Tunde continued daily, threatening messages, photos of her children taken from a distance, reminders of what would happen if she didn't follow through. The single mother of two was drowning in guilt and fear, but she couldn't see any way out. The night before Marcus's arrest, Keisha lay in bed next to the man she was about to betray, listening to his steady breathing and feeling like the most evil woman alive. Marcus stirred and pulled her closer, whispering that he loved her and promising that everything would be all right, that they would get through whatever challenges came their way together. Keisha bit her lip to keep from sobbing, knowing that in a few hours, police would be at their door and Marcus's life would be over. She thought about calling it off, about warning Marcus to run, but then her phone buzzed with another threatening message from Tunde, and she knew she was in too deep. The single mother of two closed her eyes and tried to pray for forgiveness for what she was about to do, but the words wouldn't come. She had sold her soul to protect her children and herself, and there was no turning back now. You think Keisha is the villain in this story? Wait until you discover the shocking truth about why she really made this choice, because what happens in next chapter will completely change how you see everything. This story is about to get darker than you ever imagined, so make sure you hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what comes next. The prison visiting room smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams as Marcus sat across from his court-appointed lawyer, staring at the evidence that would seal his fate. His fingerprints were all over the murder weapon, witnesses placed him near the scene. And worst of all, Keisha had given a statement to police claiming he'd been acting strange and violent in the weeks before the murder. The single mother of two he'd loved had painted him as a dangerous man with anger issues, someone capable of killing in cold blood. "Marcus, I have to ask you straight up," his lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. "Did you know the victim? Did you have any reason to be in that part of town?" Marcus shook his head, his voice breaking as he insisted he'd never even heard the victim's name before his arrest. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his lawyer's expression told him everything he needed to know about his chances. 3 months into his sentence, Marcus had become a ghost of the man he used to be. Prison had a way of stripping away everything soft and hopeful, replacing it with hard edges and constant vigilance. He'd been beaten twice by inmates who saw him as fresh meat, and he'd learned to sleep with one eye open. The single mother of two who had destroyed his life hadn't visited once, hadn't even written a letter. His former co-workers had testified against him, saying he'd always been quick to anger on job sites. Marcus realized how easy it had been for Keisha to turn everyone against him. A few well-placed lies, some manufactured evidence, and suddenly he was a monster in everyone's eyes. He spent his days working in the prison laundry and his nights lying on his thin mattress, trying to piece together how his life had gone so wrong so fast. Meanwhile, Keisha was discovering that Tunde's promises were as worthless as they'd always been. After Marcus's conviction, she'd expected Tunde to step up as a father, to help support her and the children as he'd hinted he would. Instead, he disappeared for weeks at a time, showing up only when he needed money or a place to hide from his latest criminal activities. The children kept asking about Marcus, wondering why their uncle who used to help with homework and take them to the park had suddenly vanished. Keisha couldn't tell them the truth, that their mother had destroyed the life of the only man who'd ever truly cared about them. The guilt was consuming her, and she'd started drinking heavily, trying to numb the pain of what she'd done. The single mother of two had traded an honest man's freedom for empty promises from a criminal, and the consequences were destroying her from the inside. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening when Keisha came home to find Tunde rifling through her belongings, looking for anything valuable he could steal. "Where's that necklace Marcus bought you?" he demanded, his eyes wild with desperation. When Keisha protested that she'd already given him everything of value, Tunde backhanded her so hard she fell to the floor. Amora and Kimi watched from the doorway, their eyes wide with terror as their father stood over their mother, threatening to take them away if she didn't find more money for his drug debts. In that moment, Keisha realized the true depth of her mistake. She destroyed Marcus to protect her children from this monster, but now her children were in more danger than ever. The emotional blackmailing had never stopped. It had only gotten worse. The single mother of two had sacrificed everything for a man who saw her as nothing more than a tool to be used and discarded. That night, after Tunde had left with what little money she had hidden for groceries, Keisha sat in her kitchen with a bottle of cheap gin and faced the horrible truth of her situation. Marcus was rotting in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Her children were traumatized and asking questions she couldn't answer, and she was trapped in a cycle of abuse that seemed to have no end. She thought about going to the police, about telling them the truth. But Tunde still had those photos, still had the power to destroy what little reputation she had left. Besides, who would believe her now? She'd already given sworn testimony against Marcus, painted him as violent and dangerous. The courts would see her as either a liar or a conspirator, and either way, she'd lose her children. The single mother of two had played a game she couldn't win, and now everyone she cared about was paying the price for her choices. But you haven't seen anything yet, because what Keisha discovers in next chapter about Tunde's real plan will make you realize that this betrayal goes deeper than anyone could have imagined. The truth about why this single mother of two really framed an innocent man is about to be revealed, and it will shock you to your core. Don't stop watching now. The most devastating part of the story is coming up next. 2 years had crawled by since Marcus's conviction when Detective Funmi Adebayo received an anonymous tip that would crack the case wide open. A woman's voice, shaking with fear and guilt, whispered details about the real killer that only someone close to the crime could know. The caller knew where the actual murder weapon was hidden, knew details about the victim's final moments that had never been released to the public. Detective Adebayo had worked the Marcus Thompson case and always felt something was off. The evidence was too neat, the timeline too convenient. Now, sitting in her car outside a rundown apartment building in Mushin, she was about to confront the single mother of two who might hold the key to freeing an innocent man. What she discovered would reveal a web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. Keisha answered the door looking like a woman haunted by ghosts. Her once bright eyes were hollow, her hair unkempt, and the smell of alcohol lingered around her like a toxic cloud. Detective Adebayo didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We know Marcus Thompson didn't kill David Okafor," she said, watching Keisha's face for any reaction. "We also know you made that anonymous call because your conscience is finally catching up with you." Keisha's knees buckled, and she had to grip the door frame to stay standing. The detective pushed her way inside, noting the cramped, dirty conditions the children were living in. Empty bottles littered the floor, unpaid bills covered every surface, and the single mother of two who had once tried so hard to appear respectable had clearly fallen apart. "Your children aren't even here, are they?" Detective Adebayo asked. Social services took them last month after neighbors reported neglect. The truth came pouring out of Keisha like water from a broken dam. She confessed everything. Tunde's threats, the planted evidence, the false testimony she'd given. But what Detective Adebayo heard next made her blood run cold. Tunde hadn't just wanted to frame Marcus Omoda. He'd planned to kill Marcus too, making it look like a prison fight gone wrong. The only reason Marcus was still alive was because Tunde had been arrested on drug charges before he could arrange the hit. He said, "Dead men tell no tales," Keisha sobbed. He was going to make sure Marcus couldn't ever prove his innocence, and then he was going to come back for me and the children. The single mother of two had thought she was saving her family by betraying Marcus, but she'd actually signed all their death warrants. Tunde's plan had always been to eliminate everyone who could connect him to the original murder. As Detective Adebayo gathered the evidence needed to overturn Marcus's conviction, she learned the full extent of Keisha's hell. Tunde had continued the emotional blackmailing even after Marcus was imprisoned, forcing Keisha to launder money from his drug deals and threatening to kill her children if she refused. When she'd finally tried to break free, he'd beaten her so severely she'd been hospitalized for a week. That's when social services had stepped in, taking Amora and Kimi into protective custody. The children were now living with a foster family, asking every day when their mother would come get them, not understanding that their mother's choices had destroyed any chance of their family being whole again. The single mother of two had lost everything: her children, her home, her dignity, and the love of the one man who'd tried to save them all. Tunde had played the long game perfectly, using her love for her children to manipulate her into destroying herself. The final revelation hit Detective Adebayo like a physical blow. Tunde hadn't just been jealous of Marcus. He'd been planning this betrayal from the moment he heard Keisha was happy with someone else. The murder he committed was never random. David Okafor was a rival drug dealer, and Tunde had killed him to take over his territory. But he'd needed a fall guy, and Marcus had been perfect, a decent man with no criminal record who would never be believed if he claimed he'd been framed. He used to laugh about it, Keisha whispered, her voice barely audible. He said love makes people stupid, and I was the stupidest of all. He said I was so desperate to protect my children that I'd destroy anyone, even someone who genuinely cared about them. The single mother of two realized she'd be nothing more than a pawn in Tunde's game, a tool he'd use to destroy Marcus while setting himself up as the ultimate victor. The truth is finally coming out, but you won't believe what happens when Marcus is released from prison and discovers a real reason behind his betrayal. Next chapter will show you what revenge looks like when an innocent man finally gets justice. And trust me, you're not prepared for what's coming. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. The morning sun felt like freedom against Marcus's face as he walked out of Kirikiri maximum security prison a free man, vindicated after 3 years of hell but forever changed by the experience. Detective Adebayo had worked tirelessly to overturn his conviction, and the DNA evidence on the real murder weapon had finally proven his innocence. The media was calling it one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in Lagos state history, but Marcus felt no joy in his vindication, only a hollow emptiness where his trust used to be. His mother waited by the prison gates, tears streaming down her face as she embraced the son she'd never stopped believing in. "They can't give you back those 3 years," she whispered, and Marcus nodded grimly, knowing that the man who'd entered prison was dead, replaced by someone harder, colder, and infinitely more careful about who he let into his heart. The world Marcus returned to was vastly different from the one he'd left behind. His former construction job was long gone, his savings depleted by legal fees, and his reputation in the community would take years to rebuild despite his official exoneration. Word had already reached him about Keisha's downfall, the drinking, the loss of her children, the complete destruction of the life she'd tried so desperately to protect. Part of him felt she'd gotten what she deserved, but another part couldn't shake the memory of the woman who used to cry in his arms, claiming she needed him to save her. The single mother of two who had destroyed his life was now a cautionary tale whispered about in the neighborhood bars, a woman so broken by her own choices that she'd become unrecognizable. Marcus found himself wondering if a betrayal had been worth the price she'd paid, but he quickly pushed such thoughts away. He had no room left in his heart for pity. 6 months after his release, Marcus was rebuilding his life one careful step at a time when he met Grace at a community support group for people who'd survived trauma. She was a teacher who'd lost her husband in a car accident and was raising her teenage son alone with dignity and strength. Unlike Keisha, Grace never asked for anything, never played the victim, never used her struggles to manipulate others into feeling sorry for her. She was honest about her scars, open about her fears, but never used them as weapons. When Marcus finally found the courage to tell her about his wrongful conviction, Grace listened without judgment and simply said, "The past doesn't define us unless we let it." For the first time in years, Marcus felt hope stirring in his chest. This woman wouldn't betray him because she didn't need to. She was complete in herself, not desperate for someone else to save her. Meanwhile, Keisha had hit rock bottom and somehow kept digging. Tunde had been sentenced to life in prison for David Okafor's murder, but not before he drained every cent from her accounts and left her with debts to dangerous people who didn't care about her sob story. She'd lost her job due to her drinking, been evicted from her apartment, and was now living in a shelter, seeing her children only during supervised visits that broke her heart every time. Amora was 8 now, old enough to ask hard questions about why Mommy had sent Uncle Marcus away and why Daddy was in jail. Kimi, now 6, barely remembered the stable home they'd once had with Marcus, the man who'd read her bedtime stories and taught her to tie her shoes. The single mother of 2 had become a cautionary tale about the price of betrayal, but her punishment was far from over. The families of both Marcus and David Okafor had filed civil suits against her, seeking damages for their pain and suffering. The moment Marcus had dreaded finally arrived when he walked into a supermarket and saw Keisha in the checkout line, looking like a ghost of the woman he'd once loved. She was thinner, older, worn down by years of guilt and consequences. Their eyes met across the crowded store, and for a moment, time stopped. Keisha's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. What could she possibly say to the man whose life she'd destroyed? Marcus felt his chest tighten, remembering both the love he'd felt for her and the betrayal that had nearly killed him. He thought about approaching her, about demanding answers or closure, but then he saw Grace waiting for him by the car outside, and he realized he didn't need either. The single mother of 2 who had taught him that love could be a weapon was now just a broken woman paying the price for her choices, and he was finally free from both her and the bitterness she'd created in his heart. But this story isn't over yet, because what Keisha does next in a desperate attempt to win back Marcus will shock you beyond belief. Next chapter reveals a final chapter of this devastating tale of betrayal and consequences, and trust me, you need to see how this all ends. Don't stop watching now. The conclusion will leave you speechless. 5 years after Marcus's release, Keisha stood outside the small church in Victoria Island where she'd heard Marcus was getting married to Grace, clutching a letter she'd written and rewritten 100 times. The single mother of 2 who had once destroyed an innocent man's life was now a shadow of her former self, homeless, unemployed, and estranged from her children who barely knew her anymore. Through the church windows, she could see Marcus in a crisp white suit, smiling genuinely for the first time since she'd known him, as Grace walked down the aisle in a simple but elegant dress. This was a happiness she'd robbed from him 3 years ago, the future she'd stolen with her lies and manipulation. Now she wanted to stop the wedding, to confess her love and beg for forgiveness, believing somehow that her suffering had earned her a second chance. But as she reached for the church door handle, reality crashed over her like a cold wave. She had no right to be here, no claim to this man's happiness, and no power to undo the devastation she'd caused. Inside the church, Marcus was experiencing pure joy for the first time in years as he exchanged vows with Grace, promising to love and protect her with a sincerity that came from knowing the value of trust. Grace had stood by him through his darkest moments after prison, helping him rebuild not just his life but his faith in human goodness. She'd never asked him to forget his past, only to not let it poison his future. Their wedding was small but filled with genuine love, Grace's family, Marcus's mother, and close friends who'd supported them through their healing journey. As Marcus slipped the ring onto Grace's finger, he thought briefly about Keisha and felt nothing but pity for the broken woman who'd taught him that some people's love comes with a price too high to pay. The single mother of 2 who had once been his world was now just a painful memory, eclipsed by the genuine love of a woman who asked for nothing but gave everything. Outside, Keisha crumpled the letter in her hands and walked away from the church, finally understanding that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. She'd spent 5 years in various stages of denial, bargaining, and anger, but now the acceptance was washing over her like a tide she couldn't fight. Her children were thriving in foster care and had stopped asking about her months ago. Amora was excelling in school and wanted to be a teacher like her foster mother. Kimi had found stability and love with a family who showed up for her every day without fail. The single mother of two had protected them from one monster only to become one herself, and now they were better off without her. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to save her family, she destroyed it completely, while the man she betrayed had found genuine happiness with someone who deserved it. As Marcus and Grace's wedding reception began, Keisha found herself in a bar across town, staring at her reflection in the mirror behind the bottles and seeing a stranger she no longer recognized. The woman looking back at her had aged decades in just a few years, worn down by guilt, regret, and the consequences of choices that had seemed necessary at the time. She ordered another drink and thought about the phone call she'd received from her lawyer that morning. Tunde had been found dead in his prison cell, killed by inmates who discovered he'd been informing on other prisoners to reduce his sentence. Even in death, he was still destroying lives, still causing pain to everyone who'd been unfortunate enough to cross his path. The single mother of two who had sacrificed everything for his approval and protection was now truly alone, with nothing to show for her loyalty but scars and regrets. The final scene played out not in dramatic confrontation, but in quiet, devastating solitude. Marcus and Grace drove off to their honeymoon, planning a future filled with trust, honesty, and genuine partnership. Their love story would be built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared healing, everything Keisha had been too damaged to offer. Meanwhile, Keisha walked the dark streets of Lagos, homeless and forgotten, carrying the weight of a betrayal like chains she could never remove. She'd learned too late that true love doesn't demand sacrifice of others, doesn't require manipulation or destruction, and doesn't come from fear or desperation. The single mother of two who had thought she was protecting her children by destroying Marcus had lost everything that mattered, and now she would spend the rest of her life as a living reminder that betrayal always comes with a price higher than anyone expects to pay. Her story would end not with redemption or forgiveness, but with a simple, brutal truth that some mistakes can never be undone, and some people must live forever with the consequences of their worst choices. This is how betrayal really ends, not with dramatic reunions or last-minute forgiveness, but with the quiet devastation of a life destroyed by choices that seemed necessary at the time. If this story moved you, if it made you think about trust, loyalty, and the price of betrayal, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable, are what we're all about here. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the darkest places, and Keisha's story is one that will stay with you long after you finish watching.